On today's show, we're going to talk about the things that you need to know before you start resin 3D printing. Stick around. Hey, welcome to The First Layer. My name's Richard. I'm your host here every Saturday morning and live stream Sunday afternoon, where we do our show called Ask for Help. That's where you get to be a part of our show and ask your questions related to 3D printing. Now, I want to tell you about our contest because I'm really super excited about it. It's not even really a contest, it's a giveaway. We're going to be giving away a mystery box, 2 mystery boxes each month till the end of the year. How do you get involved in that? Well, it's real simple. All you have to do is leave a like on this video, leave a comment down below, and be a subscriber to the channel. That's all it takes. And your name will get entered into the draw to receive one of our mystery boxes. They're full of great goodies. We've got some cool stuff from Matter 3D in there as well. They are a sponsor of this mystery box. And also shop TheFirstLayer.com, which you guys are going to be seeing real soon. The website is still under construction. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's get into what we're talking about today. Resin-based 3D printers. Are you ready for it? Is it something that you've been thinking about? Do you want to start resin 3D printing? Today is going to be very technical, so I hope you'll stick with me till the end. All right, let's get started. Resin-based 3D printers using digital light processing, stereolithography, or mask stereolithography are getting more common and much more affordable. They've really come down in price. Prosumer level options like Formlabs and the Prusa SL1 exist, but more economical printers like those from Creality, Elegoo, Anycubic, and more can be purchased for just a few $100s. There are also many retailers and online sources like Amazon that can provide you with everything that you need to get started. Now, resin prints look amazing when you have mastered that learning curve, and there's quite a learning curve to it. So when does it make sense to move to a low-cost resin-based printer? Well, before you start throwing your money around, we need to consider a few things. First and foremost, the printing process and resolution of resin printing is different from filament-based printing. Slicing, pre- and post-processing are hugely different. While there's a similarity between resin and FDM, and the workflow is different, but the workflow is different due to the material that you're using. So you're no longer are you using that string of plastic, but you're using a liquid polymer. There are costs beyond purchasing the printer and resin. There are other consumables to consider when you're getting into resin 3D printing as well. So I'm going to do my best to cover a lot of this with you. It's very informative today. This is the first part in a ongoing series that we're going to be doing, talking about resin printing, showing you how to use the software, and then hopefully helping you to get a successful print if you've decided to go this route. Now, in 2019, entry-level resin-based printers improved by replacing the RGB LCD screens used in most MSLA printers. Now, MSLA, as I mentioned before, is masked stereolithography, and that's what most of the entry-level printers are. They're masked stereolithographies, or MSLA, so keep that in mind. Another term used is also DLP. You can also call them a DLP printer, but they are slightly different than what a DLP printer is. Now, one of the things that they did was they improved the printers by moving from RGB LCDs to monochrome LCD screens for faster printing. And many manufacturers also went from 1080 to 4K for better overall resolution of prints. Even though laser-based SLA, DLP SLA, and MSLA are all types of stereolithography, and have similar technologies, they can't produce significantly different results. Things may not be where fuse deposition modeling, or FDM printers, were just a few short years ago. Now, it is undoubtedly far more accessible than even before. So let's take a look at some of the tips that will help you make an informed decision and whether this is a technology that's right for you. You should by now know how FDM printers work. If you don't, and you're just getting into 3D printing and you're looking for your first printer, go back and watch some of our previous episodes. We deal with a lot of FDM printers in our channel, and a lot of our members have FDM printers as well. So FDM basically works like this. It deposits molten plastic layer by layer till it produces a three-dimensional object. Okay. Now, SLA, DLP, and MSLA use ultraviolet light to cure each layer, each building on the previous, till it produces a 3D object. However, in practice, they have vastly different workflows and produce different results, and consequently, good at different things. Now, what may be second nature to FDM 3D printers doesn't always carry over to resin-based printers. Here are some of the things to think about when it comes to printing with resin. Compared to FDM printers, entry-level resin printers have build platforms that are shockingly small. These more economical printers have build platforms that are the size of modern cell phones. In fact, the LCD is exactly what's being used with the addition of an array of UV LEDs to backlight the screen and cure each layer of resin. Now, another thing that we have to consider is the stress between layers. It can result in a failed print if not done right. A peel process pulls the model off the FEP film after each layer. So it literally does that. And the model must withstand this force. Now, each subsequent layer must have a sturdy foundation. The best way to guarantee good foundation with proper model orientation and adequate supports. Getting this right during the slicing stage will reduce the peel forces and result in a successful print. Now, supports. I'm going to say this a lot because this is a very important step to consider when you're getting into resin 3D printing. Often we can avoid supports when FDM printing. With resin, supports are necessary. Supports provide structure and strength to the model as it is subjected to those peel forces that we just talked about. FDM printing aren't under the same conditions as resin, so we don't have to worry about them so much. Resin has little to no tolerance for overhangs and bridges. Printing with resin will seem as though it has no tolerance for overhangs. With FDM, unsupported overhangs will in most cases result in a droopy edge or poor surface quality. However, with resin, that unsupported area could break off or float away or even get stuck to that FEP film. This will contaminate the resin and cause the print to fail. A print orientation or a part orientation that makes layer changes as gradual as possible will minimize the overhangs and minimize the need for supports. Get ready for post-processing because you're going to do a lot more than you do with FDM. FDM cleanup's fast and easy compared to resin, believe me. When a resin print is finished, it still has uncured resin on the surface and in the nooks and crannies of the model. So what we have to do is we have to thoroughly wash it in a cleaning agent like isopropyl alcohol or something else, like Resin Away or another detergent or cleaner, and allow it to completely dry. Then the resin print will need to be further cured under UV light to ensure proper resin hardness. Now, islands in the model. There are always going to be islands in your model. And islands are parts of a model that start separate from each other, but join up together later in the print. Within resin printing, it's best to avoid them, especially if they're thin or long, or if the part has a precise dimensional requirement. Taller, thin islands will lack the stability foundation of the rest of the model. And as they print and peel repeatedly, they can shift slightly. And I've seen that before. By the time they join back up with the rest of the model, they may not be as precise as expected, assuming that they don't break off and end up in the resin somewhere. Always use proper safety equipment. This is something I get asked about a lot. Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? And I'm going to say yes. All operations involving uncured resin should be done with gloves and eye protection. Always wear gloves and eye protection. If resin gets on your skin, wash it off right away with soap and water. Do not expose that skin with resin on it to UV light, because you can get tissue damage as it burns, because what'll happen is if that cures on your skin, it can cause burns to the skin, and it's not very comfortable, believe me. The majority of preprint model tweaking will consist of finding an optimal model orientation and balance that needs to support with the desire to minimize the post-processing burdens caused by large forest of supports. And I'm going to be showing you something about that in just a second. Here are some general steps involved between importing that model and receiving the final print at the end that highlight the differences between filament-based and resin printing, okay? So let's start with pre-processing. Choose a model orientation that offers a good balance between a manageable number of supports and providing enough structure to withstand those peeling forces that we talked about. Avoid cups, overhangs, unsupported bridges, and islands. Try to have details and presentation surfaces on the opposite face of the supports as much as possible. Now let's get into the printer setup. We're going to set up the build platform and build tank. If you're changing resin types, ensure that both the platform and the tank have been thoroughly cleaned first before dumping new resin in. Pour in the resin, avoid exposing that resin to UV light, wear gloves and eye protection. We talked about that before. And allow all safety and follow all safety precautions, which boil down to don't get it on your skin. And if you do, wash it off immediately, okay? Now, the other thing you want to do is avoid mixing resin types. Don't mix two different brands together because what can happen is different properties of each resin and different exposure times could cause your resin not to work properly and not cure properly as you're printing. Now let's get into some post-printing. After printing, the parts will resemble a rigid plastic thing, but it's still going to be dripping with resin, okay? Rinse that uncured resin away by washing the part in isopropyl alcohol and allow the part to dry. You want to make sure that the part is completely dry and make sure that you get all of that old resin off, or all of that previous resin off. You can use a toothbrush, get into some of the smaller things. If you're doing miniatures for D&D or anything like that, you may want to get a toothbrush in there very gently and just kind of scrub out some of that excess resin. It's really good to do that, and then give it a rinse and let it dry, okay? Now, most resins require additional post-curing. This can be done with a DIY cure box. You can purchase a commercial one from Anycubic. There's a number of other ones out there as well. Or you can just leave it in the sunlight for a while. Now, remove supports with flush cutters. We all have a set of those from our FDM printers, or by snapping them off if the surface finish isn't quite that important. Then proceed with other post-processing like sanding and painting, okay? Two other things I want you to keep in mind related to the materials and the general workflow. First is ventilation, and second is temperature. Now, ventilation is important because some of the materials that you're going to be using, some of the resins have an odor to them. And I really don't want you getting sick or lightheaded because you're in an area that doesn't have good ventilation. Make sure that you have good ventilation because these can give you a headache. It's happened to me. Some of the resins that I've used in the past really have strong odors. Some of the resins that come with 3D printers have strong odors. And then there are some out on the marketplace that have no odor at all. So it is really important to have good ventilation in whatever room you have your resin printer set up in. Now, temperature is another important thing because it influences the cure time of resins. The cooler the resin, the slower it cures. Now, printers without temperature controlled build tanks, and that's most of the ones that we're going to be looking at right now, the economical ones, will benefit from a work area that's kept at a stable room temperature for the most consistent results. So what I'm going to say to you is don't stick it in your garage unless you've got a steady temp in there at all times, 19, 20 degrees throughout the winter if you're up in Canada like we are, or in colder climates in the US. You really want to make sure that you've got it in a nice temperature controlled area to get the best results from your 3D printing with resin. Smashing by on an economical resin printer from your favorite retailer absolutely makes sense if you're ready to accept or deal with each of the following points I want to bring up. Build volume will limit you to small projects unless you've got the budget to buy a much bigger resin printer. Prep, maintenance, and handling can be messy and requires gloves. Ventilation is good due to the smell of some of the resins and the need to wash finished prints in alcohol, okay? Consumables, including more than the resin and alcohol for parts washing, okay? You're gonna have more consumables. You're gonna have things like the FEP film for the tank. It must be replaced periodically, so you wanna have some of those on hand. For hobbyist printers, this is, like I said, that thin plastic that's at the bottom of the tank, and it's like a drum. When you put it on correctly, it should sound like a drum skin. The setup and cleanup process of resin must be done regardless of the job size. It doesn't matter what you're printing. You're going to have to make sure that you have everything that you need for the cleanup. So it's more efficient to do prints in a batch. So if you're doing miniatures, try and get as many as you can on that build plate rather than one-offs, because that's exceedingly rare. The problem with one-offs is if it takes 2 hours, that whole build plate, if you have 6 on there, is going to take 2 hours. If one takes 2 hours, they all take 2 hours. Unlike FDM, where if one part takes 10 minutes, you have to multiply that 10 minutes by every other part, plus adding in time for the movements. With resin printing, you don't have to do that. So it can be a little bit better in that regard. Resin also has a limited shelf life. Bear that in mind. Unlike filament that really doesn't, resin does have a limited shelf life. So resin sitting in the build tank should be used sooner than later. And again, never mix that resin don't just pour another batch of resin into old resin. You want to make sure that you're pouring it back into the bottle when you're done. There's a higher post-processing burden in the form of parts washing, additional curing, and support removal. Okay, now all this means that there are hidden costs to resin printing beyond the price of the printer and the bottle of resin. Okay, something that we don't get typically with FDM. We buy our roll of filament, we have our printer, we put it in. Yes, there are some consumables. Your mat may be a consumable on your FDM printer. There might be nozzles are considered consumables as well, but we know that going in. With resin, we don't kind of know exactly what we're getting into with those consumables. So it's important that we have everything that we need, okay? Now, if this is all acceptable to you, then take advantage of the economical options for desktop resin printing and start experimenting, okay? Because when prints come out well, they look fantastic. Just keep in mind that a resin printer is not likely to replace your FDM printer, okay? Because they are different tools for different jobs. Well, I hope you got something out of that today. We're going to continue this series in another few weeks where we actually get into talking a little bit more about the software we showed earlier. And we are going to kind of take you through that, and we'll show you some of those safety measures in practice as well. I want to remind you again that if you got something out of today's video, hit that like button. Also, go ahead and make sure, if you're not subscribed, to hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment down below, because all of that goes into our contest this month or our giveaway this month for 2 mystery boxes. We're going to do 2 on 2 separate days. The first one we're going to draw on the 17th, and the second one on Halloween the 31st. And Matter 3D is one of the sponsors of this mystery box, and so is shop TheFirstLayer.com. So we are going to make sure that you've got some great prizes. So you want to leave a like, you want to be a subscriber, and you also want to leave a comment. All three of those things have to be done in order for you to get entered into the contest or into the giveaway. I hope one of you guys gets our first box on the 17th. And again, we're going to see you next time right here on The First Layer. On Sunday, we have our live show, Ask for Help. Don't forget to join us, 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. My name's Richard. I'm out of here for another day. And like I said before, The First Layer is always your foundation to a great print. See you next time.